The world that entered the 20th century believed it was standing at the peak of human civilization. Across Europe, magnificent cities expanded with grand boulevards, electric lights illuminated streets that had once relied on candles, railways connected distant nations, and factories produced goods on a scale never seen before. Scientists and inventors were transforming everyday life, while artists, philosophers, and writers celebrated what many believed would be an era of endless progress. To millions of Europeans, the future appeared brighter than ever before. Yet beneath this image of prosperity and confidence, powerful forces were quietly pulling the continent toward catastrophe. Political rivalries, imperial ambitions, military competition, and fierce nationalism were growing stronger every year. Leaders believed they could control these tensions through diplomacy and alliances. Instead, they were unknowingly building the foundation for the deadliest conflict the world had ever witnessed. To understand why the First World War began, it is necessary to travel back to the year 1871. That year marked one of the most significant turning points in European history. After defeating France in the Franco-Prussian War, the German states united under the leadership of Prussia, creating the German Empire. In the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, King Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed the first German emperor. The choice of location was deeply symbolic and humiliating for France. The French people never forgot the insult, and many dreamed of one day restoring their national honor. Germany's unification instantly changed the balance of power in Europe. It was no longer a collection of smaller kingdoms, but a powerful industrial nation with a rapidly growing economy, modern infrastructure, and one of the strongest armies in the world. Within only a few decades, Germany challenged Britain in manufacturing, science, and technology. It also sought colonies overseas, bringing it into direct competition with other European empires. During the 19th century, European nations competed fiercely to expand their colonial empires. Britain controlled territories on every continent, earning the title of the empire on which the sun never set. France ruled vast areas of Africa and Southeast Asia. Belgium possessed the Congo, while Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain also maintained overseas colonies. These empires provided valuable resources, strategic ports, and international prestige. Germany entered the colonial race later than its rivals. Although it acquired territories in Africa and the Pacific, many German leaders believed their nation deserved far more influence. This growing desire for global power increased tensions with Britain and France, who viewed Germany's ambitions with suspicion. At the same time, Europe experienced an intense wave of nationalism. Nationalism inspired people to feel deep pride and loyalty toward their own country. While this feeling often united nations internally, it also encouraged hostility toward neighbors. Across Europe, politicians and newspapers promoted patriotic ideas that sometimes portrayed rival nations as enemies rather than partners. The Balkans became one of the most dangerous regions on the continent. Located in southeastern Europe, the area contained many ethnic groups, languages, and religions living side by side. As the Ottoman Empire weakened during the 19th century, newly independent nations such as Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece sought to expand their territories. Austria-Hungary and Russia also competed for influence there. Russia considered itself the protector of Slavic peoples, especially Serbia. Austria-Hungary feared that Serbian nationalism might inspire Slavic populations within its own empire to seek independence. This rivalry transformed the Balkans into what many diplomats called the powder keg of Europe. Everyone knew the region was unstable, yet few realized how devastating a single spark could become. Meanwhile, military power became a symbol of national strength. Governments invested enormous sums in expanding their armies and navies. Germany developed an exceptionally disciplined military system based on universal conscription, ensuring millions of trained reservists could be mobilized quickly during wartime. Britain, an island nation, depended on its navy to protect global trade routes and maintain control over its empire. When Germany began constructing powerful battleships capable of challenging British naval dominance, London became increasingly alarmed. A naval arms race soon emerged, with each country attempting to outbuild the other. Every new battleship launched by one side prompted an even larger response from the other. This competition extended beyond ships. New artillery, machine guns, railroads, explosives, and communication technologies transformed military planning. European generals believed that future wars would be decided rapidly through swift offensives. Few understood that modern industrial weapons would instead create prolonged and devastating conflicts. Another major factor shaping Europe was the system of alliances. Political leaders hoped alliances would preserve peace by discouraging aggression. Ironically, they achieved the opposite. Germany formed the Triple Alliance with Austria-Hungary and Italy. Together, these countries promised mutual support if attacked. In response, France strengthened its partnership with Russia. Britain, which had long avoided permanent alliances, eventually joined France and Russia to create the Triple Entente. Europe was now divided into two enormous military blocs. A conflict involving one nation could quickly draw in every major power. Despite these dangers, ordinary Europeans continued living normal lives. Paris remained famous for its culture. Berlin expanded as a center of science and industry. Vienna flourished with music and architecture, and London stood as the financial capital of the world. Cafes filled with writers and intellectuals discussing politics, philosophy, and the future. Most people believed that economic interdependence would prevent another large-scale European war. International trade connected nations more closely than ever before. Banks financed projects across borders, businesses relied on foreign markets, and millions traveled between countries with relative ease. Many politicians also underestimated the destructive potential of modern weapons. They remembered earlier wars that had lasted only months. Military leaders confidently predicted that if war came, it would be over by Christmas. Meanwhile, another figure quietly influenced Europe's future: Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Energetic, ambitious, and often unpredictable, he sought to expand Germany's international influence through an aggressive foreign policy known as Weltpolitik. His speeches frequently emphasized German strength and national pride, but they also increased anxiety among neighboring countries. Across the continent, newspapers fueled patriotic enthusiasm. Many publications exaggerated foreign threats, encouraging readers to support larger militaries and stronger governments. Public opinion gradually shifted toward confrontation rather than compromise. Diplomatic crises repeatedly brought Europe close to war. The Moroccan crises between Germany and France heightened tensions. The Bosnian crisis of 1908 angered Serbia and Russia after Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 further destabilized southeastern Europe, leaving alliances strained and governments deeply suspicious of one another. Each crisis ended without a continental war, reinforcing the dangerous belief that future disputes could also be managed successfully. Instead of encouraging caution, every narrowly avoided conflict made leaders more confident in taking greater risks. Behind closed doors, military planners worked continuously on detailed invasion strategies. Germany prepared the Schlieffen Plan, designed to defeat France rapidly before turning east to fight Russia.
France developed Plan 17, expecting a bold offensive against Germany. Russia accelerated railway construction to improve mobilization. Austria-Hungary prepared for possible war with Serbia. Britain studied how it might support France if conflict erupted. These plans depended on speed. Once mobilization orders were issued, stopping them became almost impossible. Railways had strict schedules, troops had assigned routes, and supplies moved according to carefully calculated timetables. A political crisis could therefore transform into a full-scale war within days. By the summer of 1914, Europe had become a continent armed to the teeth, divided by alliances, driven by nationalism, and haunted by mutual suspicion. Peace still existed, but it rested on fragile foundations. Then, in the city of Sarajevo, a single assassination would ignite the explosion that diplomats had feared for decades. One gunshot would trigger a chain reaction involving emperors, kings, generals, and millions of ordinary people. Within weeks, nearly every major European power would be at war. The conflict they expected to end within months would instead last more than 4 years, reshape the political map of the world, destroy ancient empires, and set the stage for an even more devastating global conflict only 20 years later. The age of optimism was about to disappear, and humanity was preparing to enter one of the darkest chapters in its history.
On the morning of June 28, 1914, the streets of Sarajevo were crowded with spectators waiting to welcome an important royal visitor. The city, located in the province of Bosnia and Herzegovina, had become part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire only a few years earlier. While many citizens accepted imperial rule, others believed the region belonged with neighboring Serbia. Political tension had been building for years, and that summer morning would change the course of world history forever. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, arrived in Sarajevo with his wife, Duchess Sophie. Unlike many members of the royal family, Franz Ferdinand believed the empire needed reforms to survive. Ironically, some historians argue that his ideas might have reduced ethnic tensions within the empire if he had eventually become emperor. But history rarely follows the path of possibility. As the Archduke's motorcade drove through the city, members of a secret nationalist organization known as the Black Hand waited along the route. Their goal was simple but deadly: assassinate the future ruler of Austria-Hungary and send a message that Bosnia should not remain under imperial control. The first assassination attempt failed. One conspirator threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but it bounced off the folded roof and exploded beneath the next vehicle, injuring several officers and civilians. Instead of canceling the visit immediately, Franz Ferdinand decided to continue with his official schedule before visiting the wounded in the hospital. It was a decision that sealed his fate. As the driver attempted to change routes, he accidentally turned onto a side street. Coincidentally, another conspirator, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, happened to be standing only a few feet away after believing the mission had already failed. Suddenly, the royal car stopped almost directly in front of him. Princip stepped forward, drew a pistol, and fired 2 shots. One bullet struck Duchess Sophie in the abdomen. The other hit Archduke Franz Ferdinand in the neck. Within minutes, both were dead. The assassination shocked Europe. Newspapers reported the murders as a tragic political crime, but few ordinary citizens imagined they were witnessing the beginning of a global disaster. Even many government leaders believed the crisis could still be contained. Austria-Hungary, however, saw the assassination as more than an act of terrorism.
Officials believed Serbia had either supported or tolerated the conspirators. Although Serbian government denied involvement, Austrian leaders decided that Serbia had to be punished. Before taking action, Austria-Hungary sought support from its strongest ally, Germany. Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II and his advisors assured Austria-Hungary that Berlin would stand behind them even if military action led to a wider conflict. Historians later called this promise the blank check because Germany offered nearly unconditional support. Confident that Germany would protect it, Austria-Hungary prepared an ultimatum unlike any Serbia had ever received. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. What began as a regional conflict now activated the alliance system that had been quietly waiting for decades. Russia immediately announced support for Serbia. Tsar Nicholas II believed Russia had both political and cultural responsibilities to defend fellow Slavic nations. Russian military mobilization began soon afterward. Germany viewed Russian mobilization as a direct threat. German military planners had long feared fighting Russia and France simultaneously. Their strategy, known as the Schlieffen Plan, required Germany to defeat France quickly before Russia could fully mobilize. Germany, on August 1st, declared war on Russia. 2 days later, Germany declared war on France. The carefully prepared military plans that had existed only on paper were suddenly becoming reality. German armies began moving west towards France. Instead of attacking heavily fortified French defenses directly, the Schlieffen Plan called for invading through neutral Belgium before sweeping into northern France. Belgium had declared neutrality decades earlier, and its independence was guaranteed by several European powers, including Britain. On August 4, 1914, German forces crossed the Belgian border. Now, Britain faced a difficult decision. Some politicians wanted to avoid another European war, but allowing Germany to violate Belgian neutrality without consequences threatened Britain's credibility and balance of power policy. That evening, Britain declared war on Germany. In a single week, Europe's strongest nations had transformed from uneasy rivals into active enemies. The war spread even further. France mobilized millions of soldiers. Russia continued expanding its armies. Britain deployed the professional British Expeditionary Force to France. Germany advanced rapidly through Belgium. Austria-Hungary fought Serbia and prepared against Russia. Soon, Japan joined the Allies, hoping to seize German possessions in Asia. The Ottoman Empire later entered the war on Germany's side, followed by Bulgaria. Italy, despite belonging to the Triple Alliance, initially remained neutral before eventually joining the Allies in 1915 after receiving territorial promises. The conflict was no longer a European dispute. It had become a world war. Across Europe, massive crowds gathered in city squares as soldiers marched towards railway stations. Families waved flags, military bands played patriotic songs, and many believed they were witnessing the beginning of a glorious adventure. Young men volunteered in enormous numbers. Students left universities. Factory workers enlisted beside businessmen. Farmers exchanged plows for rifles. Many expected victory within months. Few imagined they were saying goodbye to their families forever. Railroads became the lifeline of mobilization. Thousands of trains transported millions of soldiers, horses, artillery pieces, food supplies, and ammunition according to incredibly precise timetables. Entire armies crossed continents in only days. It was one of the largest military mobilizations in human history. Germany's advance through Belgium initially achieved remarkable success. Belgian forces resisted fiercely, despite being heavily outnumbered. Their expected resistance delayed the German timetable and allowed France and Britain valuable time to organize their defenses. Reports of German attacks on Belgian towns also shocked international opinion. Civilians fled their homes carrying only what they could hold. Historic buildings burned. Entire communities were displaced. Meanwhile, France launched its own offensive under Plan 17. French commanders believed aggressive attacks would overwhelm German forces. Instead, advancing French infantry encountered devastating machine gun and artillery fire. Thousands died within hours. Bright red uniforms, still worn by many French soldiers at the beginning of the war, made them highly visible targets on the modern battlefield. The optimism of early August quickly faded. By late summer, German armies approached Paris. The French government evacuated the capital. Many feared France was about to collapse. Then, in early September 1914, Allied forces launched a desperate counterattack along the River Marne. The First Battle of the Marne became one of the most important battles of the entire war. French troops, British soldiers, and even Paris taxicabs transporting reinforcements helped stop the German advance. The German army retreated. Paris was saved. The Schlieffen Plan had failed. Unable to achieve decisive victory, both sides attempted to outflank one another in what became known as the Race to the Sea. As each army extended its defensive lines northward, they eventually reached the English Channel. By the end of 1914, nearly 700 kilometers of trenches stretched across Western Europe from the North Sea to the Swiss border. Neither side could easily break through. The war of movement had become a war of trenches. Instead of ending by Christmas, as politicians and generals had come.
By the beginning of 1915, the war that every government had expected to end within a few months had become a nightmare with no clear end. Across Europe, hundreds of kilometers of trenches stretched from the North Sea to the Swiss border. Soldiers lived surrounded by mud, rats, disease, and the constant fear of enemy artillery. Rain filled the trenches with water, turning them into rivers of mud, where many men developed a painful condition known as trench foot. Every day, shells exploded overhead. Snipers waited for exposed targets, and machine guns made even the smallest advance incredibly dangerous. The First World War soon introduced weapons the world had never witnessed on such a scale. Poison gas drifted silently across battlefields, forcing soldiers to wear heavy gas masks or risk a slow and agonizing death. Massive artillery guns fired thousands of shells every hour, destroying entire villages and reshaping the landscape into endless fields of craters. Tanks appeared for the first time in 1916, attempting to break the deadlock of trench warfare, while aircraft evolved from simple reconnaissance machines into deadly fighters and bombers. Some of the bloodiest battles in human history took place during these years. At Verdun in 1916, France and Germany fought for nearly 10 months. More than 700,000 soldiers were killed or wounded. The Battle of the Somme, launched by Britain and France, became another symbol of unimaginable loss. On the very first day, the British Army suffered around 57,000 casualties, the worst single day in its military history. Yet, despite enormous sacrifices, the front lines moved only a few kilometers. The war expanded far beyond Europe. Fighting spread across Africa, the Middle East, and the oceans. In 1917, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, attacking ships supplying Britain. One of the most famous incidents was the sinking of the RMS Lusitania, which contributed to growing American anger. Combined with the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the United States, these events convinced President Woodrow Wilson to enter the war. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Fresh American troops, industrial production, and financial resources gave the Allies a tremendous advantage. At the same time, Russia experienced revolution. The Russian Empire collapsed, and the new Bolshevik government signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918, withdrawing Russia from the war. Germany launched one final major offensive on the Western Front in the spring of 1918. Initially, German forces made impressive gains, but they lacked supplies and reinforcements. Allied forces, strengthened by American soldiers, eventually pushed them back during what became known as the 100 Days Offensive. Inside Germany, food shortages, economic collapse, and public unrest weakened the country. Soldiers were exhausted, civilians were starving, and support for continuing the war disappeared. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and fled to the Netherlands. On November 11, 1918, at exactly 11 a.m., the guns finally fell silent. After more than 4 years of destruction, the First World War had ended. The cost was staggering. Around 20 million people had died, and millions more were wounded or permanently disabled. 4 great empires, the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires, collapsed. Europe had changed forever. Yet peace proved fragile. In 1919, the victorious powers gathered in Paris to negotiate the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was forced to accept responsibility for the war, surrender territory, reduce its military, and pay enormous reparations. Many Germans viewed the treaty as deeply unfair and humiliating. Economic hardship, political instability, and national resentment grew throughout the 1920s. Amid this turmoil, a former Austrian soldier named Adolf Hitler rose to prominence. Promising to restore Germany's pride, rebuild its military, and overturn the Treaty of Versailles, he attracted millions of supporters. In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany and quickly transformed the country into a dictatorship. Germany rearmed, occupied neighboring territories, and ignored international agreements. Britain and France hoped that diplomacy would prevent another conflict, but Hitler's ambitions continued to grow. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland using a new strategy called Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun. Unlike the first conflict, the second became even more destructive. Germany conquered much of Europe, Japan expanded across Asia, and Italy joined the Axis powers. The Holocaust resulted in the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims. The war reached every continent. The Soviet Union suffered enormous losses after Germany invaded in 1941. The United States entered the war following Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The turning point came with decisive Allied victories at Stalingrad, El Alamein, and Midway. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied forces landed in Normandy, opening a new front in Western Europe. After months of fierce fighting, they liberated France and advanced towards Germany. In April 1945, Soviet troops entered Berlin. Adolf Hitler committed suicide inside his underground bunker on April 30, 1945.
Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, celebrated as Victory in Europe Day. The war in Asia continued until August 1945, when the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Facing unprecedented destruction, Japan announced its surrender on September 2, 1945, bringing the Second World War to an end. By then, more than 70 million people had lost their lives, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. From the ashes of war, world leaders created the United Nations in the hope of preventing another global catastrophe. Although peace returned, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union soon led to the Cold War, shaping international politics for decades. Both the world wars transformed humanity forever. They changed borders, destroyed empires, accelerated scientific and technological development, inspired new international institutions, and demonstrated both the extraordinary courage and the terrible cruelty of human beings. Their legacy remains visible today, not only in memorials, museums, and cemeteries around the world, but also in the political systems, international alliances, and global institutions that continue to influence modern life. The greatest lesson they left behind is timeless. When diplomacy fails, hatred triumphs, and nations choose war over dialogue, the cost is measured not only in territory or wealth, but in millions of human lives that can never be replaced.